Here's what I keep coming back to. Not the ruling, not the press conference, not the politics of who won or lost the news cycle. What I keep coming back to is the speed, the sheer compression of how fast the institutional framework bent, and what nobody is saying about what bends next. Because something shifted this week, quietly, structurally, and if you blink, you miss it. The Supreme Court ruled that the president exceeded his legal authority on tariffs, 6-3, including 3 conservative justices, including 2 he personally appointed. That's not a close call at the margins. That's the highest court in the country drawing a hard line, and doing it with voices from inside his own coalition. Normal response? Pause. Reassess. Work with Congress. His response? Within hours. He's going bigger. Let that land. The court said stop. He said, watch me find another door. And here's the part that matters. He's right that the door exists. The ruling didn't strip presidential tariff authority wholesale. It struck down specific actions under specific emergency statutes. Large swaths of executive trade power are still intact, which means the administration isn't cornered. It's rerouting. A 10% global tariff applied to every nation simultaneously, announced via executive order, slower mechanism, more complicated legal architecture, same destination. The court drew a line. The administration is drawing a new map around it. That's not defiance for its own sake. That's a system under stress finding the path of least resistance. And paths of least resistance don't stop moving just because someone draws a line. Now hold that image. Because the refund question is where this gets genuinely dangerous. Billions of dollars in tariff revenue have already been collected. Paid by importers, absorbed through supply chains, passed into prices you've already paid. And now part of that revenue has been ruled legally questionable. The court's own ruling, written by Brett Kavanaugh, a Trump appointee, described the process of figuring out refunds as, quote, likely going to be a mess. A Supreme Court justice, in an official ruling, used the phrase, going to be a mess. That's not a warning from a critic. That's an admission from inside the institution that issued the ruling. They struck it down. And they don't know what to do with the money either. Gavin Newsom wants checks cut, with interest. Illinois' governor put a dollar figure on it, around $1,700 per family. Nobody in Washington confirmed that number. Nobody denied it. The administration has no clear refund mechanism. Congress offered no direction. The courts provided no timeline. The money is in legal limbo. The people who paid it are waiting. And the institutions responsible for resolving it are pointing at each other. That's not a policy dispute. That's a pressure system with no release valve. Now watch what happens in Congress, because this is where the fracture gets visible. Dan Newhouse, Republican congressman from Washington State, sits on the House Appropriations Committee, owns a farm, ran his state's agriculture department. The exact profile of member the White House needs to hold the line. Rural, conservative, economically credible on trade. He voted to rebuke the president over Canadian tariffs. And when the Supreme Court ruling came down, he said it was right, constitutionally correct, that it reaffirmed congressional authority, that it should hold regardless of who's in the Oval Office. That's not a Democrat celebrating a loss for the administration. That's a Republican from farm country whose constituents are directly inside the tariff economy, saying the court got it right and Congress needs to act on it. The president's response to that kind of dissent? He told reporters he doesn't need Congress. He's going forward with or without them. 2 branches of the same government, moving in opposite directions, simultaneously. And then there are the 14 districts. Cook Political Report. 14 House Republican seats currently rated as toss-ups heading into the next election. 14 members who have to go home and explain tariff policy, the legal chaos, the refund uncertainty, the $12 billion in farmer payments funded by revenue that's now partially contested to constituents who are absorbing it in prices. $12 billion. That's what the administration committed to farmers as direct compensation from tariff collections. A buffer. Checks scheduled to arrive by month's end. The president framed it as making producers whole. Congressman Newhouse, a farmer himself, said it helps but doesn't make anyone whole. He specifically flagged specialty crop growers, the smaller producers who don't fit the major commodity programs, as falling through entirely. So even the buffer has gaps. Even the political insurance policy has uninsured exposure. And those 14 members in toss-up districts watched the president double down, announce broader ambitions, not narrower ones, hours after the ruling, and now have to calculate what that means for their margins in districts where economic anxiety is already present and rising. This is what institutional stress looks like before it becomes institutional rupture, not a single dramatic break. 100 smaller fractures appearing at the same time, in the legal framework, in the congressional coalition, in the revenue accounting, in the refund process that nobody has designed yet. And now, the State of the Union. Days away. The president will stand in the House chamber and face all of it simultaneously. The 9 justices, 3 of whom he appointed, 2 of whom ruled against him, all of whom he will face in the same room. The members of Congress who applauded the ruling that constrained his agenda. His own party members from toss-up districts doing the math in real time. He said he was ashamed of the justices who voted against him, that their decisions were incorrect, that he had powerful alternatives and intended to use them. He will walk into that chamber and perform confidence, in a room full of the people he just accused of failure, in front of a country that is simultaneously watching the legal framework of his signature economic policy get reconstructed on the fly. That performance will be televised. What's underneath it won't be. Here's what won't make it into the broadcast. The same week all of this happened, the president announced the government would begin declassifying files on UFOs, extraterrestrial phenomena, an active process with an active timeline. A former president made public statements on the same subject. 2 commanders-in-chief simultaneously engaging with the question of what the government actually knows about what's in the sky. Since 1946, the National UFO Reporting Center has logged more than 117,000 documented reports. Prediction markets are now pricing the probability of formal government confirmation before 2027. That story, which in any normal week would dominate every conversation in the country, got 4 minutes of airtime and a footnote, because the tariff ruling was louder. That's the signal. Not the UFO story itself, the fact that it disappeared, the fact that something potentially historic got absorbed into the noise without friction, without pause, without the country even registering the weight of it. That's what a system under maximum informational load looks like from the inside. You stop being able to tell which things matter because everything is arriving at the same volume. And in that environment, the stories that move slowly, the structural ones, the ones without a single dramatic moment, become invisible until they aren't. Which brings me to Hammond, Indiana, the Chicago Bears. One of the oldest franchises in professional football. Generations of identity anchored to a single city. They are in active negotiations to leave Illinois and cross the state line. Indiana's legislature is advancing stadium proposals. The Bears have expressed genuine interest. The numbers are real. Approximately $2 billion in team commitment. Total project cost estimated around $5 billion. Public money in the mix. Indiana's governor is making the case. He points to economic devastation in the Hammond region after steel production collapsed and never returned. He argues a major sports franchise is an economic anchor that rebuilds gravity, the kind of long-term commercial magnet that tax incentives alone can't manufacture. He compares it to the Baltimore Colts. He notes that 11 NFL franchises already play in cities that don't match their names, the Giants and Jets in New Jersey, the Commanders in Maryland. This would be one more. The Illinois governor is demanding the Bears go public about what they actually want. Which is what you say when you're losing the negotiation. Why does this matter here? Not because of football, because of what it reveals about the fiscal landscape underneath the federal noise. States are not waiting for Washington to stabilize. They can't. So they're competing with whatever leverage they have, whatever public financing they can justify, whatever economic narrative they can construct, to attract the anchors that federal policy used to help provide. The Bears' relocation fight isn't a sports story. It's a consequence story. It's what happens when institutional reliability at the federal level, contracts, and states are left improvising in the gap. Legal fracture, congressional fracture, revenue fracture, informational overload, and now economic anchoring moving to the state level because the federal framework is too contested to depend on. Every single one of these is happening at the same time, not sequentially, simultaneously. This is what systemic stress feels like before the terminology catches up to the reality, before the word crisis gets applied. Right now it's just a court ruling, a press conference, a toss-up district count, a refund nobody designed, a farm payment with gaps, a State of the Union collision, 117,000 unexplained objects in the sky, and a football team packing up and crossing a state line. Individually, each one has an explanation, a context, a spokesperson. Together they are something else. Together they are a picture of institutions being stress-tested across every axis simultaneously: legal, political, economic, informational, with no coordinated release mechanism and no shared timeline for resolution. The president is not stopping. He said so directly. He will arrive at the State of the Union with a new legal map, a rerouted tariff strategy, and a performance of momentum. He will project forward motion. The room will be watching. What the room won't say out loud. The constitutional framework of his signature policy is being reconstructed under litigation pressure in real time. The refund process for contested revenue doesn't exist yet. The congressional coalition has visible fractures. 14 seats are in play, and the administrative bandwidth required to manage all of it, simultaneously, is not infinite. Systems don't fail when the most dramatic thing happens. They fail when too many things happen at once, and the load exceeds the capacity to respond coherently. We're not there yet. I want to be precise about that. The guardrails are still holding. The institutions are still functioning. The legal process is moving, even if it's moving without clear direction. But guardrails exist to absorb force. They're not unlimited. And right now, the force is coming from every direction at once. The 30 days following the State of the Union will tell you more than the speech itself. Watch whether Congress moves to codify its newly affirmed tariff authority or retreats back into observation. Watch whether any refund framework materializes or whether the legal limbo compounds. Watch whether the 10% global tariff executive order survives its first legal challenge. Watch those 14 toss-up districts start moving in the polling. Watch which farmers fall through the gaps in the specialty crop programs Newhouse flagged. Watch which states accelerate their own economic anchor deals because they've already stopped waiting for federal clarity. Watch how many more institutional actors, courts, members of Congress, governors, start making decisions that assume federal coordination won't arrive on time. That's the shift that's already happening underneath the noise, not the headline defiance, the quiet recalibration, the part where the institutions that used to wait for Washington start building around it instead. Watch for the thing that doesn't make the broadcast, because the broadcast is already full, already at maximum volume. The most consequential movements in a system under stress are rarely the loudest ones. They're the ones that appear in a district polling average 3 weeks out, in a specialty crop growers operating decision in February, in a stadium bill advancing through an Indiana legislature, while Illinois is still asking what the Bears actually want. They're the ones that get 4 minutes and a footnote, the ones that later everyone will say were obvious, if only they had known what to look for. Here is what I want you to hold on to. The president walked out of the Supreme Court ruling and announced expansion. Not retreat, expansion. That is a signal about how this administration reads constraint. It doesn't slow down when it hits a wall. It routes around it, and the routing takes place in the legal and institutional architecture that most people never look at. The executive orders, the alternative statutes, the emergency provisions that are still intact and still available, which means the court drew a line, and the line is already being flanked. That is not a metaphor. That is the literal sequence of events that happened this week. The stable version of this story ended before the ruling came down. What's unfolding now is what comes after. The phase where the institutional friction is real, the pressure is distributed across every system simultaneously, and the outcomes depend entirely on which guardrails hold and which ones flex past their design limits. Nobody is telling you that clearly. Not from the podium, not in the chamber. Pay attention to the structure, not the noise. The structure is already shifting. The question is whether you see it before it finishes moving.